Thomas walked slowly along the empty street. The rain soaked through his thin jacket as he clutched his last paycheck. He had worked at the Oak Ridge factory for 30 years, and now it was closed forever. The blue envelope in his hand held money. That would not last long. At 57, with gray hair and worn hands, finding new work seemed impossible. The small town of Oak Ridge looked sad in the rain. Thomas knew every crack in the sidewalk, every shop window, and most of the people behind them. This had been his home since birth. His late wife Emma had loved this town too. They had built a life here, raised their daughter Lucy here. But Emma was gone now, taken by illness 5 years ago. And Lucy had moved to the city, busy with her own life and family. Thomas stopped outside the grocery store. Mr. Phillips, the owner, waved at him from inside. Thomas nodded back, but didn't enter. His pride was still too strong to face questions about the factory closing. Everyone knew, of course. In a town this small, news traveled faster than the rain clouds. "What now?" he whispered to himself as he continued walking past the shops where everyone knew his name. His small house at the edge of town might be next to go. The mortgage payments would be hard without steady work. The rain fell harder. Thomas hunched his shoulders against it, too lost in worry to hurry. Water dripped from his gray hair down his neck. He had always been a proud man who handled his own problems. Emma used to tell him he was too proud for his own good. Maybe she was right. Thomas passed the town park where he used to take Lucy when she was little. The swings moved gently in the wind, empty now because of the rain. He remembered pushing her higher and higher while she laughed. "More, Daddy, more," she would shout. Life had seemed so simple then. His phone rang in his pocket. Thomas checked. The screen. It was Lucy. He let it ring. What could he tell her? That her father was now unemployed with few prospects? That the house where she grew up might soon be sold? No, he couldn't burden her with his problems. She had her own life now, her own family to worry about. The call went to voicemail. Thomas sighed and put the phone away. He would call her back when he had better news to share, when he had a plan. Right now, he had nothing. Thomas stopped at the bus shelter, not to catch a bus, but to escape the rain and gather his thoughts. He sat on the cold bench, shoulders slumped, feeling more alone than ever before. Through the rain-streaked plastic of the shelter, the town looked blurry and distant, just like his future. An old photo in his wallet caught his eye as he put away his paycheck. It showed Emma, Lucy, and himself on a summer picnic 10 years ago. They were all smiling. Thomas touched Emma's face gently with his fingertip. "I'm not sure what to do now," he whispered to her image. Across the street, a small cafe called Mary's Place glowed warmly. Thomas had never entered, despite passing it daily for years. Mary Wilson had opened it after her husband died. Thomas had always nodded politely when they crossed paths, but grief had made him keep to himself. The cafe windows showed people talking and laughing inside, safe from the rain and cold. Thomas watched as Mary herself moved about inside, serving customers with a smile. She was about his age, with kind eyes and silver hair tied back neatly. He remembered how the whole town had helped her after her husband's passing. She had taken that support and built something new from her pain. The rain drummed harder on the bus shelter roof. Thomas shivered as a cold drop found its way down his collar. His house would be empty and cold too. No one waiting. No dinner cooking. Just silence and bills piled on the kitchen table. He thought about what Emma would say if she could see him now. She would probably push him toward that cafe door, tell him to stop being so stubborn, to accept that sometimes people need help. But accepting help meant admitting weakness, and Thomas wasn't ready for that yet. As darkness began to fall, Thomas finally stood up. He would go home, make a simple dinner, and try to form a plan. Tomorrow would be another day. He stepped out, from the shelter, ready to face the rain again. Thomas was halfway across the street when the cafe door opened. Mary stood there waving at him through the rain. "You'll catch your death out there," she called. "Come in for a hot drink on the house." Thomas stopped, rain running down his face. He had not planned to speak to anyone today. His wet clothes clung to him and his shoes were soaked through. Pride made him want to keep walking, to not accept what felt like charity. But the genuine concern in Mary's eyes touched something inside him. The warm golden light spilled out from the cafe onto the wet pavement. Through the window, Thomas could see people sitting at small tables, talking and enjoying hot drinks. It looked like another world. A warm, dry world where problems might not seem so big. "I'm fine, thanks," he called back. But even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. Mary shook her head. "Nonsense. I won't take no for an answer. Not in this weather." She didn't go back inside, just stood in the doorway waiting, as if she had all the time in the world. With cold fingers, Thomas gathered his dignity and crossed the street. The smell of fresh bread, coffee, and cinnamon embraced him as he entered the warmth. The sudden change from cold to warm made his glasses fog up. "Take a seat by the fire," Mary said, closing the door behind him. "I'll bring you something hot." Thomas stood awkwardly for a moment, water dripping from his jacket onto the floor. There were about 10 people in the cafe. Some looked up at him with friendly nods. He recognized most of them. James from the post office, William who ran the hardware store, and Betty who worked at the town library. "Thomas, come sit here," William called, pointing to an empty chair near the fireplace. "Haven't seen you since. The factory news broke. Terrible business, that." Thomas slowly removed his wet jacket and hung it on a hook by the door. He made his way to the chair, aware of eyes on him but seeing no pity in them, only neighborly concern. "Thanks," he said simply as he sat down. The heat from the small fireplace began to warm his cold hands. Mary appeared with a large mug of something, steaming. "Hot chocolate," she said, placing it before him, with a dash of cinnamon. "Best thing for a cold day." Thomas reached for his wallet, but Mary waved him off. "First one's on the house, town rule for anyone caught in the rain." He knew there was no such rule, but he nodded gratefully. The mug warmed his hands, and the sweet smell reminded him of winter evenings with Emma and Lucy. "I've seen you pass by every day for years," Mary said, sitting down across from him. "Always thought you might pop in someday." "Never had reason to stop before," Thomas admitted, taking a small sip. The chocolate was rich and perfect. "Now I've got nothing but time, it seems." William moved his chair closer. "Heard about the factory. 30 years you were there, right?" Thomas nodded, not trusting himself to speak more about it. "This town has weathered hard times before," William said thoughtfully. "When the mill closed in '98, we thought that was the end. But we found ways." Betty joined them, bringing a plate of cookies. "My son lost his job last year," she said. "He's working in Millfield now. Commutes every day. They're always hiring at the shipping center there." Thomas hadn't thought about looking beyond Oak Ridge. The idea of starting over somewhere new at his age seemed impossible. But Betty's words planted a small seed. As he sipped his chocolate, the cafe grew busier. A young couple came in with a baby, an old man with a dog, 2 teachers from the local school. Each person greeted Thomas by name. Some expressed sympathy about the factory. Others shared stories of job losses and new beginnings. "When my Robert died," Mary said quietly as she refilled Thomas's mug, "I thought my life was over too. The cafe was his dream, not mine. But here I am 5 years later." Thomas looked around the warm room. "You've done well with it." "Not alone," Mary corrected. "This town helped me, brought business when I had none, fixed things when they broke. That's what we do here." For the first time since receiving his final paycheck, Thomas felt something besides worry. It wasn't quite hope yet, but perhaps its distant cousin, the feeling that he wasn't facing the storm alone. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside Mary's cafe, Thomas found himself talking, really talking for the first time in years. And even more surprisingly, he found himself listening too. Thomas began, stopping at Mary's cafe regularly after that rainy day. At first, he told himself it was just for the warmth and the excellent coffee. But soon he had to admit that the company was what really drew him back. The cafe became a bright spot in days that were otherwise filled with job applications and worry. One morning, about 2 weeks after his first visit, Thomas sat at what had become his table near the window. Mary brought over his usual black coffee without being asked. "You're up early today," she noted with a smile. Thomas nodded. "Job interview at 10. Wilson's garage needs a part-time helper." Mary set down the coffee. "That's good news. Frank Wilson is a fair man." "It's just part-time," Thomas said, trying not to get his hopes up. "And I don't know much about new cars. They're all computers these days." "But you know people," Mary said, "and you're reliable. That counts for more than you think." As Thomas sipped his coffee, the door opened and Elizabeth Jenkins walked in. She taught at the local school and came to the cafe most mornings for tea and toast. "Morning, Mary." "Morning, Thomas," she called cheerfully, shaking rain from her umbrella. Thomas raised his cup in greeting. Elizabeth had been his daughter Lucy's teacher years ago. She was about 40 now, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that served her well with students. Elizabeth ordered her usual, and then came to sit across from Thomas. "I heard you're looking for work," she said directly. Thomas nodded, a bit surprised. "News travels fast." "Small town," Elizabeth said with a shrug. "But that's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Our school maintenance person is retiring next month. It's not glamorous work, fixing things, keeping the grounds tidy, that sort of thing. But it's steady." Thomas set down his cup slowly. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting you apply," Elizabeth clarified. "I don't make the final decision, but a recommendation from a teacher carries weight. And I remember how you used to volunteer for the school carnival every year, fixing all those rickety game booths." The memory made Thomas smile slightly. Those had been good days when Lucy was young and Emma was alive. He had always been good with his hands, able to repair almost anything mechanical. "I'll think about it," he said. "Don't think too long," Elizabeth advised. "Applications close Friday." After she left to join some other teachers, Mary came over with a refill. "That would be good for you," she said quietly. "Working at a school full of noisy children." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Mary laughed. "Being useful again, having a purpose, that's what we all need, isn't it?" Her words stayed with Thomas as he went to his interview at Wilson's garage. Frank Wilson was indeed fair, but he needed someone with more knowledge of modern car electronics. Thomas left feeling deflated, but not surprised. Instead of going straight home, his feet took him to the school. It was recess time, and children played in the yard despite the light drizzle. Their laughter and shouts filled the air. Thomas watched them from the fence, remembering Lucy at that age, fearless on the monkey bars, always with skinned knees, and a wide smile. A small maintenance building stood at the edge of the school grounds. Through its open door, Thomas could see an older man sorting through tools. Without really planning to, Thomas found himself walking over. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you the maintenance person?" The man looked up. He was older than Thomas, maybe in his 70s, with white hair and work-worn hands. "Been here 20 years, he said proudly. "Name's George." "Thomas Reed. I heard you're retiring soon." George's face brightened. "You interested in the job? Come in. Let me show you what it entails." For the next hour, George showed Thomas around. His workshop and the school grounds, explaining the various tasks and challenges. There were leaky faucets to fix, wonky chairs to mend, playground equipment to keep safe, and grounds to maintain. "It's not just about fixing things," George explained as they walked. "You become part of their world. These kids, some of them don't have a dad or grandpa at home. Sometimes they just need someone to listen, you know?" Thomas watched as a small boy ran up to George, proudly showing him a paper airplane. "Look, Mr. George, I made it fly all the way across the playground." George examined the plane seriously. "Fine engineering, Jack. You've got a good eye for design." The boy beamed and ran off to show his friends. George turned to Thomas with a smile. "See what I mean? It's more than just a job." For the first time in weeks, Thomas felt a spark of something like hope. Thomas filled out the application for the school maintenance position that very afternoon. Elizabeth helped him update his old resume. emphasizing his years of practical experience at the factory and his volunteer work around town. He submitted everything 2 days before the deadline and then tried not to think about it too much. The meantime, William from the hardware store offered Thomas part-time work stocking shelves and helping customers. "Just until something better comes along," William said. "Your factory knowledge is gold to folks looking for the right parts and tools." The work wasn't much, just 3 mornings a week, but it gave Thomas a reason to get up and get dressed. The small paycheck helped stretch his savings a bit further. More importantly, it kept his mind busy and his hands useful. One evening after finishing at the hardware store, Thomas sat in Mary's cafe nursing a cup of tea. The cafe was quiet, with just a few customers reading or working on laptops. Mary came over with a piece of apple pie and set it in front of him. "I didn't order this," Thomas said, though the pie looked delicious. Mary smiled. "Consider it payment." "For what?" "For fixing my leaky sink this morning, and the wobbly table last week, and the stuck window the week before that." Thomas shrugged. "Just small repairs. Anyone could have done them." "But they didn't." "You did." Mary sat down across from him. "That's who you are, Thomas. You notice what needs fixing and you fix it. Not just things, but situations too. I've seen how you helped Mrs. Parker carry her groceries, how you showed young Tim how to patch his bicycle tire." Thomas felt his face grow warm. He wasn't used to such praise. "I don't need charity," he said, his old pride speaking. "It's not charity," Mary replied firmly. "It's community. When my Robert died, this town carried me until I could walk again. Now it's your turn." Thomas thought about her words as he ate the pie, which was as good as it looked. Perhaps there was no shame in accepting help when offered with genuine care. Emma would have told him the same thing, he realized, 3 weeks after applying for the school job. Thomas received a call asking him to come in for an interview. He wore his best shirt, the blue one Emma had always liked, and arrived 15 minutes early. The school principal, Mrs. Howard, asked thoughtful questions about his experience and how he would handle various situations. "Working around children requires patience and good judgment," she explained. "Safety is our top priority." "I understand," Thomas said, thinking of his own daughter and now his grandson Oliver, whom he rarely saw. "I raised a child of my own. I know how curious they can be, how quickly accidents can happen." 2 days later, the call came. The job was his if he wanted it. The pay wasn't as good as the factory, but it was steady work with decent benefits. Thomas would start in 2 weeks, spending the final days with George to learn the specific needs of the school. That evening, Thomas sat in his small living room, looking at the phone in his hand. It had been nearly a month since he'd properly spoken to Lucy. They had exchanged a few brief texts, but he had been avoiding a real conversation, not wanting to burden her with his problems. But now, with news worth sharing, his finger hovered over her name in his contacts. Lucy answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said, realizing how unusual it was for him to call in the evening. "I just wanted to chat. How's Oliver and James?" Lucy sounded surprised but pleased. "They're both good. Oliver lost another tooth yesterday. He's convinced the tooth fairy is actually a tiny robot now." Thomas laughed, picturing his imaginative grandson. "Listen, Lucy. I should have told you sooner, but the factory closed down last month." "Dad, why didn't you say something? Are you okay? Do you need help?" "I'm okay," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "It was rough at first, but things are looking up now. I've got a new job starting at your old school, actually. Maintenance work." The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years. Thomas found himself telling Lucy about Mary's cafe, about his part-time work at the hardware store, about the people who had stepped up to help him when he needed it most. "You sound different, Dad," Lucy said thoughtfully. "More, I don't know. Open?" Thomas thought about this. "Maybe I am. Losing the factory job was hard, but it's shown me some things too. About people. About myself." As they said goodbye, Lucy made an unexpected suggestion. Dad, why don't I bring Oliver for a visit next weekend? It's been too long. For the first time in months, Thomas found himself genuinely looking forward to something. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge, bringing warm sunshine and fresh green leaves to the trees lining Main Street. Thomas walked to work with a light step, nodding to neighbors who greeted him by name. After 3 months as the school maintenance man, he had settled into a comfortable routine. The children knew him now. The younger ones called him Mr. Thomas, and often followed him around the playground, asking questions about what he was fixing. The older students respected his quiet authority, and sometimes sought his advice on woodshop projects or broken bicycles. This particular morning was special. It was Thomas's birthday, his 58th, something he hadn't mentioned to anyone at school. But somehow Mary had found out. When he stopped at the cafe for his morning coffee, she presented him with a blueberry muffin topped with a single candle. "You didn't have to do that," Thomas said, but he was smiling. "Birthdays should be celebrated," Mary insisted. "Any big plans for today?" Thomas shook his head. "Just work, then home. Lucy's bringing Oliver for the weekend, though. They arrive tomorrow." "That's wonderful," Mary said. "How often do you see them now?" "Once a month." Thomas's smile widened. "Oliver loves helping me in the workshop behind the house. Says he wants to be a fixer like Grandpa when he grows up." The relationship with his daughter and grandson had blossomed over the past few months. Regular visits had replaced the occasional phone call. Lucy had been surprised and pleased by the changes in her father, how he had opened up, made friends, found new purpose. After finishing his coffee, Thomas walked to the school. The day passed quickly with regular tasks, fixing a leaky drinking fountain, replacing light bulbs in the library, and helping set up for the spring concert. As he worked, Thomas thought about how different his life was now compared to the day the factory closed. He had less money but more satisfaction, less worry but more connection. His house was safe, the mortgage payments were tight but manageable with his new salary, and the rooms felt warmer somehow, filled with Oliver's laughter during visits and the occasional dinner with Mary or other new friends. At 3 o'clock, as Thomas was cleaning up his tools, Mrs. Howard appeared at the workshop door. "Thomas, could you come to the staff room before you leave today? There's a small issue we need your help with." "Of course," he replied, washing his hands at the utility sink. "Plumbing problem?" "Something like that," Mrs. Howard said with an odd smile. "See you in 15 minutes." Thomas finished his cleanup, checked that all dangerous tools were safely locked away, and headed to the staff room. As he pushed open the door, he was greeted by a chorus of voices. "Surprise! Happy birthday!" The room was filled with teachers, office staff, and some of the older students from the school newspaper club who had interviewed Thomas for a feature last month. A large cake sat on the table, decorated with tools made of frosting. A banner hung across the windows, clearly made by the art class, with "Happy Birthday, Mr. Thomas" painted in bright colors. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed. In all his years at the factory, nothing like this had ever happened. He had been a good worker, respected by his colleagues, but largely invisible in the larger operation. Elizabeth approached with a card signed by everyone. "We know you don't like a fuss," she said, "but you've become such an important part of our school. The children insisted we celebrate." One by one, people came up to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. The school secretary thanked him for fixing her chair that kept sinking. The music teacher was grateful for the clever storage solution he'd built for the recorders. Even the shy janitor expressed appreciation for Thomas's help with the floor waxer. As Thomas cut the cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting his favorite, he noticed Mary slipping in the back door. She caught his eye and winked. Of course, she had helped plan this. Thomas made a mental note to thank her later. The small party lasted less than an hour, but it left Thomas with a warm feeling that stayed with him all the way home. As he walked, his phone buzzed with a text from Lucy. "Happy birthday, Dad. Oliver has made you something special. Can't wait to give it to you tomorrow." At home, Thomas sat in his favorite chair and looked around the living room. Photos now, filled spaces that had been empty for years. new ones of Oliver alongside older ones of Emma and Lucy. A half-finished birdhouse that he and Oliver were building sat on the side table. A book Mary had lent him waited on the arm of the chair. Thomas thought of the frightened, lonely man who had walked through the rain 6 months ago, clutching a final paycheck and seeing no future ahead. That man could never have imagined this. AI life rebuilt. Not the same as before, but in some ways richer. The factory closing had felt like an ending. Instead, it had become a beginning.